Hi everybody, Luca Mazzucchelli is here, and today we are here with a very special guest, Kelly McGonigal. Kelly McGonigal is a psychologist, a PhD, and award-winning science writer. Her mission is to translate insights from psychology and neuroscience into practical strategies that support the well-being of individuals and communities. And after the international success of her bestsellers, The Willpower Instinct and The Upside of Stress, today she's going to introduce us to her new book, The Joy of Movement. Kelly, first of all, thank you very much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Kelly. I am a big fan of yours, and I read all of your books, and I wrote the preface
Yeah.
to the Italian edition of The Upside of Stress and The Willpower Instinct. So I'm very glad to have you here. First of all, I would like to ask you, how are you? How are you handling the COVID situation and the restrictions?
Yeah, it's an interesting time for sure. I mean, there have been a lot of challenges and disappointments this year. I was realizing that it's been a year since I've seen anyone in my family in person except for my husband, which is really unusual because I haven't been able to travel. And my family and many of my family members are high risk. So that sort of thing has been really strange and difficult. And at the same time, it's been an interesting opportunity to remember what matters most in my local community and to find out to whom I really matter. And what was, I think, really surprising and rewarding was to find out that the biggest difference that I actually had to make in people's lives was through the joy of movement. And I'm back now to teaching outdoor dance classes after 6 months of not being able to teach either academic classes live or movement classes live. And so that is sustaining me and my local community.
Yes, I understand. In Italy too, we had to change our habits a lot. But anyway, let's speak about your book. I read it, and I have to tell you that even if I've always recognized the importance of exercise as part of a healthy lifestyle, it represented a really turning point for me, this book, and my relationship with physical activity changed. So there are many extraordinary benefits that movement has on our mind, well-being, and more generally on our lives. And in your book, you tell us about them in a truly captivating way, and making accessible to everyone the results of the most recent psychological research on this topic. So let's start here. What are the reason why we should get exercise according to psychological research, and what do you mean by the joy of movement?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say I do want to hear about your turning point and your relationship
Yeah.
with activity. I'm always so fascinated to hear about this. So, but let me start by saying that, we know that around the world, people who are more physically active are happier. They experience more positive emotions like love and gratitude and hope. They have more satisfaction with their lives. They have better relationships with others. And this is true every demographic you can imagine, every age, every country on the planet. There's something about being physically active that really supports people's happiness any way that we would define it. And when I talk about the joy of movement, I'm really talking about the joys of movement. And it's how moving your body, whether it's through something we traditionally call exercise, like going for a run or a swim, or whether it's simply moving your body to engage with life, like through dance or through gardening, that it seems to give us access to instincts that human beings have that help us survive and thrive and connect with others. So movement seems to help us really harness and access joys like cooperation and mastery, joys like music and the joy of being in nature, collective joy, the joy of connection and belonging, joys like persistence and overcoming obstacles, which gives rise to strengths like courage and to hope.
Where can we find, Kelly, the joy of movement? Are they any special activities we have to carry on to have this experience, even if maybe we're not professional athletes?
Yeah. You don't have to be a professional athlete, first of all. So as you know, in my book, I try to feature people who have really different experiences and challenges, even with their physical bodies, whether it's, people with Parkinson's disease, or whether it's people recovering from a stroke, people with physical disabilities. It's not that you have to have a particularly athletic or fit body. It's that whatever body you have, you move it in ways that for you create meaning or pleasure, or connect you to communities that you care about, or that put you in a place that inspire you. So it's really about finding your own path and listening to your direct experience. And I will say that the research shows there are certain types of movement that are especially effective if what you're looking for are psychological benefits. So for example, looking at the types of movement that are most likely to help people who are depressed or recovering from grief or from trauma. We know that, for example, exercising outdoors the way that it affects the mind is almost like meditation, except that people often experience that kind of self-transcendence and mental peace immediately. Whereas, meditation, which of course I'm a big proponent of, it often takes a long time to train yourself to experience deep inner peace from meditation. And many people find that going for a walk outdoors, swimming in natural waters, or like the dance classes that I'm now teaching outside, that being in a natural environment, it gives you a sense of being connected to life. It quiets the mind, it relieves stress and anxiety in ways that are really powerful. So if somebody were looking for a place to start, I would say, well, that's one place you could start. Now, even more than nature, I am inspired by music. And we know that moving to music also deeply enhances all of the natural joys of movement, whether it's enhancing the neurochemical high. So if you move to music, you'll get a bigger burst of dopamine and adrenaline and endorphins. Music can change the meaning that you make out of a workout. So if you're going for a walk or a run, or you're lifting weights and you're listening to music that's about being tough, being strong, pushing through, you can actually sense, even like it'll change the way that you sense what it means when your legs get tired, that you won't think to yourself, oh, I'm so weak, or I'm so old, or this is too hard. You'll hear that song that inspires you and you'll think, this is me getting stronger. I'm tough, I'm brave. And of course, music is a great way to move with other people. And we know that when you move to music with other people, that also enhances bonding and community and a sense of belonging. And so basically in the book, like every chapter is about a specific way to really amplify the joys that you can get from any type of movement. But it really is. It basically comes down to movement lets your brain know that you are alive and engaged with life. So anything that uses your body, uses some muscles, is going to give you some of these benefits.
In your book, Kelly, you speak about how we can learn to use movement as an antidote to three modern epidemics: anxiety, depression, and loneliness. Yeah. How can we do it? So it's a movement and every day, and music together.
Yeah, so basically the first thing you can do is trust that there's no dose too small or no movement too gentle or too beginner to have this effect. So the research is really clear that as long as you are doing a movement that is appropriate to your body, that is, if it's challenging for you physically to walk around the block, you don't run a marathon tomorrow. You meet your body where you are, and you do something that is appropriate and safe for your body. We know there's no dose too small and no movement insufficient to begin to improve mood. So the first thing is you sort of trust the process. And one thing that I've been suggesting to people is if it seems like a lot, like you can't even imagine doing a workout or, going for a long walk or run, again, to pick one song that inspires you or comforts you or gives you energy, put it on and then move in any way that that song inspires in you, whether it's doing some stretches or doing some strength-based movement or dancing with your kids, at home. That you could think of that as medicine in and of itself. A couple of minutes, a song you like, and moving in ways that just help you feel alive in this moment. And then if you want to think about movement sort of a stronger medicine, there's research that a certain dose of exercise really begins to change the structure of your brain and the function of your brain in ways that act as anti-anxiety, as antidepressant, that increase your resilience and even your sensitivity to pleasure and joy. So if you're looking to, basically, if you want to change your brain, the way that we know exercise can change your muscles or can remodel your heart, we're talking about doing at least 20, maybe 30 minutes a day, and that would be a really good dose. Do you have to do it every day? I mean, I think you should, because you eat every day and you sleep every day. But we're really thinking about making regular movement a part of your life, and the dose of 20 to 30 minutes of something that is moderately challenging or more challenging. And that basically means you really feel your heart rate is getting up, or you feel like it's asking something of you. You could not do it forever. That's about the right intensity to begin to see major changes in the brain that act as antidotes to anxiety, depression, and loneliness. And those are just some of the ways.
I was struck by a passage from your text in which you say that movement can bring out the best version of ourselves. And can you please explain a little bit this idea?
Yeah, and I'll tell you a story from my experience with COVID too that I think really points to this. And this is again, so like there's so many ways that movement can act like an antidepressant or relieve anxiety or loneliness. Part of it is this biochemical change that is just about being active. But there's also the story that you get to tell yourself because of the movement that you do. So when COVID-19 hit California and everything got shut down, I couldn't teach my classes. My academic classes moved online, which is so different than teaching in person. All my travel was canceled. I couldn't see my family. I felt really disempowered. I felt like I had no control. And it was a type of fear and anxiety and almost like paralysis that really was not, it's the worst version of myself when I get stressed, is to withdraw and to feel powerless. So I bought a heavy boxing bag, a used heavy boxing bag. Some guy dropped it off in my driveway, and I started boxing almost every day. And there was something about punching and kicking that made me feel empowered. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just the workout that did that, but that, I got my husband to take a picture of me doing it, as like other people got to see me as that version of myself. I had a trainer who helped me online who saw me as a fighter and would talk to me about, finding that fighting spirit and even like literally a will to live. And that was enormously helpful for me at a time when I otherwise might have really retreated into my worst instincts of withdrawal and despair. And instead of having a defeat response, I felt brave and I felt like I was willing to fight. And that's my example. In the book, I have so many stories of people who tapped. In fact, I was inspired to start boxing by a story in my book about the woman who found herself paralyzed and in a wheelchair as a relatively young adult and not wanting to give up, wanting to feel tough. And so she started boxing at a boxing gym and actually was thinking of her, which is another, one of the reasons that I wrote this book is I found that it's not only that movement can bring out the best in us, but one of the things that was so amazing for me is when I asked people, tell me about your relationship with movement, for people who have fallen in love with a form of movement, when people have found a way that exercise supports them or an activity that supports their mental health, who they are when they talk to you about it is so inspiring. Because often what people find through movement is that the movement brings out the best in them while allowing them to acknowledge and make peace with the things that are really difficult. You know, whether it was the woman I wrote about who was grieving the loss of her son, or the man I wrote about who struggled with serious depression his entire life and found through ultramarathon running almost like a metaphor for not giving up and not giving in to his darkest impulses, to take it one step at a time and keep going. That often movement, and then you talk to people about movement and what dance means to them, or what swimming means to them, or what gardening and caring for the natural environment means to them, and you see the good in humanity. It's quite inspiring. And so when people are thinking like, well, okay, so what, should I just go to the gym, or should I just, start walking? I often will say, what's a form of movement that inspires you when you see other people do it? And that's often a clue as to what a form of movement that might bring out an aspect in you that's particularly important at this time in your life.
And there is a concept I am particularly fond of, and on which I have even written a book. It is courage, that you also mentioned in the subtitle of your book. How can physical exercise help us build courage?
Yeah. Well, so part of it is the narrative that people often discover they're capable of more than they thought they were through movement. Whether it's something like powerlifting and literally physically lifting weight that is enormously intimidating, and then you sense your own strength. People who have learned to run or walk long distances or swim long distances, and they go through that experience of every cell in their body is saying, stop, you can't keep going. But they find themselves tapping into their deepest motivation, or they feel connected to something bigger than themselves, and they find that in that moment they can keep going. These lessons translate to everyday life. And I can't tell you how many times people have told me that once they discovered that they could complete this challenging obstacle course, or lift this weight, or go to a dance class after having not danced in several decades, that they found themselves being brave in other roles and relationships and goals in ways that really matter to them. So part of it is that you simply discover you are brave. Movement is a way to practice it. But there also is, I'm just so fascinated by the mind-body relationship. Part of me is also fascinated by how physical movement changes our chemistry in ways that make us brave. And so I'll give you a really simple example. Most people who have ever exercised have heard of lactic acid or lactate, which is this metabolic byproduct of muscle contraction. So whatever form of exercise you do, you're producing this metabolic byproduct, and everyone blames it for fatigue and muscle soreness. But what researchers now know is that it also works to reduce anxiety and to increase like courage and willingness to explore and psychological resilience. So if you just think about that for a moment, that every time you exercise, you are creating a metabolic byproduct that makes you brave, that relieves anxiety. It literally travels from your bloodstream to your brain, and it can cross the blood-brain barrier. How amazing is that? That literally that sense of fatigue you feel, after you do a difficult workout and your legs feel tired, that you can say to yourself, the fact that my legs feel tired right now is evidence that I have literally just made my brain more brave. I think that's incredible that the mind and the body are built like that. But I just realized I never got to hear your story. You told me that you'd experienced maybe a shift in the way you think about movement, or I want to know what's your form of movement? What do you love?
Now, listen, Kelly. Can you see that? is a jumper?
Oh,
I don't know
yes.
But in my office now, before so I take some minutes between the one meeting and one other to jump in my day. And then I started with a personal trainer that every week help me and my wife, and we train together. And so this is an important. It is so important for me, because movement for me it wasn't so cool and so it wasn't an habit for me making some exercise, and so
well, can I just say two things about what you just shared? So one is that you may remember from the chapter where I talk about, I think it's a chapter where I'm talking about music and how music can make us happy. And I talk about how there's certain types of movement that naturally express and induce joy, and bouncing is one of them. Like any type of bouncing. I mean, you can bounce where you are, or you can bounce on a trampoline. And this is like around the world in every culture that's ever been studied. Bouncing makes people happy, not just children, but throughout the lifespan. So that's like a really simple example of, if you pay attention to your direct experience, there are so many ways of moving that make people feel good or make people feel strong. So you don't always need to go to some expert to tell you you must move in this way. Jumping, bouncing, that's a perfect example of do it yourself. But I love the idea that you are also exercising with your wife. There's that study I mentioned in the book where on days when spouses exercise together, they report feeling a better relationship the whole rest of the day, including feeling more loved and more supported by their partner. And there's so many reasons why that might be true. But we know that if you want to strengthen a relationship, moving together is a really good way to do that.
Yeah, it's something like a couple therapy, because so we spend time together and we share time with with some good movement. So we are happy about it. And Kelly, in your book, you also speak about how movement can be a beneficial activity after major natural disaster affecting entire communities, such as hurricanes and terrorist attack. How? And could the same thing also apply to the actual global pandemic?
Yeah. So, let me start with, let's talk about COVID-19. I've been following the research, and I'm really excited and heartened to see that there's now research that has been published on every continent, from every continent in the world except for Antarctica, showing that physical activity during the COVID crisis is strongly linked to mental health. Now, this is all epidemiological study, not interventions where they're forcing people to exercise. But, again, every continent, so many different countries, so many different ages and populations, people who are able to increase or sustain moderate or higher levels of physical activity are experiencing less depression and anxiety and loneliness than people who were inactive and stayed inactive, or people who were previously active and became less active. So that we have really good evidence that moving your body is one of the most protective and beneficial things that you can do for your mental health at a time like this, which is really important because we know that also around the world, COVID-19, even in places that haven't seen as severe a catastrophe as we've had in the United States, that throughout every country that this crisis has increased mental health problems. So now more than ever, activity is something that we can choose to support ourselves. But there is this interesting research that looking at movement after natural disasters. And, one of the studies that I found most interesting was looking at activity after an earthquake and a tsunami in Japan, particularly in a community that was devastated by it. A lot of loss of life, a lot of loss of homes. And what they found is that all forms of physical activity were beneficial in people recovering, in preventing depression, but that moving with other people was even more effective. And I think that this is something that I've also seen during COVID-19. When we went into shelter in place and I couldn't teach in person, I started making movement videos for my classes. And I got a lot of feedback from them that, maybe it was the only time of the day that they smiled and they felt connected. But boy, when we were able to move in person again, I got an email after that first class from someone who said she almost died of an overdose of happiness after our first class. And it makes such a difference to be able to move together, because when we move with other people, not only does it help us connect and it creates that neurochemistry of belonging, but there's a psychological effect called we agency, which is, it's a kind of an empowerment and a kind of hope that comes when you move in synchrony with other people. So it's been observed by anthropologists and historians who look at things like why do. So many militaries throughout history use marching and synchronized drills and even like movement rituals and dancing to create a greater sense of courage and solidarity among a community. To why it is that people love to do walks or races for cures, or to celebrate the lives of people who have died. So moving together, I think if somebody, and I know that it's difficult now in COVID-19, but if it is an option for you, that sense of like people will say things like they believe that positive change in the world is more possible, or they believe that the biggest problems in their lives, they have greater hope about their ability to make a change in a positive direction. And this comes, whether you go for a walk with a friend, or whether you march in a protest, or whether you, take an online yoga class and you feel connected to the people that you're moving with.
Kelly, how do you balance such a demanding and prominent job with your family life and your passion for physical exercise?
First of all, let me say that movement has always been like the priority, even though it's not what I am best known for, and it's not what gets the most attention or praise or accolades. I've always said, so I've been teaching movement for 20 years, and I've always said to anyone who's ever asked that teaching group movement experiences is the most important thing I do in terms of having a positive impact on my community and in terms of my own mental health, and making me feel like every day I'm making a difference and I get a chance to connect to joy and to hope myself. So it's funny, I often think about everything else I do as funding my ability to just teach community dance classes that are, affordable and accessible to diverse populations. So it's almost like everything else I do, like write books, is in service of being able to have a meaningful daily life of sharing movement with people. So that, I don't know if that's like what that reflects in terms of balance. And then, I think that one of the things that drives me is wanting to have a sense every day that I'm making choices that are consistent with my values. And so that's how I often think about things, whether it's to accept an opportunity, whether it's to leave a responsibility that feels like maybe it's out of balance with the rest of my life, is I just want to know that every day I'm doing things that connect me to the people I care about, that I believe have a reasonable chance of giving someone else hope. I mean, I think so this sort of conversation that we're having now, the reason I do these sorts of things is because I'm really hoping that somebody's going to listen to it who needs to hear that encouragement to find that song that inspires them, who will put it on, who will maybe, dance with their spouse or their kid and feel encouraged about their ability to deal with the challenges in their life. That's why I do things like that. And that's how I think about work-life balance. And if something doesn't feel consistent with those goals or values, I just let it go.
Your work is truly inspirational for everyone. Out of curiosity, who are you inspired by? What are your role models and mentors?
Well, so if we were upstairs in my writing office, we're in my living room right now, but if we were in my writing office, you would see on the wall, I have a self-portrait by a writer, Natalie Goldberg. And I don't know if she's known well outside of the United States, but she's a memoir writer who also is a Zen practitioner. And she's one of my role models and mentors because she is a writer who writes about everyday life, and she's particularly drawn to things that are kind of dark. She writes about family conflict and loss and mental health challenges in ways that are just so honest. And for years, I didn't really have the courage to do that, but I would read her books and have a sense of like, I want to be that kind of writer. And she also is a teacher, and I've had the chance to study with her. I want to be that kind of person who just talks about everyday life and ordinary everyday life and invites people to share their experiences in ways that let you see the good in humanity and have a sense of feeling connected to others. She's the writer who's done that the most for me. And I feel like I've tried to take steps in that direction as the kind of teacher that I am and the kind of writer that I am, even though, like talking about myself is still like one of the scariest things that I do because I'm pretty private. But so I look at writers and teachers like Natalie Goldberg, who I believe have courage, but also it's like really rooted in everyday life. There's something just so wonderful about paying attention to people's actual experiences. I'm not super philosophical. I'm more likely to be uplifted by someone telling me about their day than like some, I don't know, flight of fancy. So she's one of my role models. Also, I think about the teachers I've had in my life. From the time I was a child, there was a particular teacher, Barry Moore, who was a director and a choreographer that I had the chance to study and work with, to my advisor in graduate school, James Gross, who's a famous emotion psychologist. But more than teach me how to do research, I got to watch him teach, and his passion for teaching and the way that he developed a strategy for mentoring students that really was looking to understand who they were and what they could offer the world. And that's something that Barry Moore did too. When I was a child, I saw how he would look for what was unique and special about a child and give them an opportunity to show that in ways that I didn't see other adults paying that careful attention to who people were. So that also is something that I try very hard to do as a teacher, when I get a chance to advise graduate students, and as a writer, when I'm choosing stories to share in books. I think about people like Barry, who are really interested in what someone has to offer the world and give them a platform for doing it just by being themselves.
And are you already working on a new book? And or
Nope.
No.
No, it takes me years to write a book, and I often feel like after a book comes, so this book just came out this year.
Yes.
That part of my job is figuring out who it belongs with, and I'm just now. I continue to get feedback, particularly about the last book, which The Upside of Stress, which came out in a lot of countries in 2015, so more than 5 years ago. And I'm continuing to get feedback now about where it has landed. So I got an email this week that it's being shared with people who are doing contact tracing during COVID-19 as a way to support them in what's a really stressful position. And what I've learned is that book, the audience it's really speaking to is people who are choosing to do stressful things for the benefit of others, whether it's people who work in healthcare, teachers, social workers, that's who this book is really resonating with. And to me, that makes me so happy. That is an audience that I admire and also consider myself part of. So now my job is to figure out like who this book is for and learn about it. And then, talk to me in a couple years about the next book.
Okay, so last question before you go. Have you ever seen the film Back to the Future?
Yes. Wait a minute. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. Yes, I've seen it. So, a few hundred times, maybe.
So if you had the DeLorean the time machine, okay, and you could go back 15 years ago with the awareness and the knowledge you have today, what would you say to Kelly of that time?
Yeah. So that would have been 2005. So in 2005, in December of 2005, it was about 6 months before I was going to get a phone call that actually changed my life. And when I think about that time, so I got a phone call. I got a voicemail from James Gross, my mentor in graduate school. So in 2005, I was just 1 year out of having finished my PhD. And I decided I didn't want a traditional research career. So I was out there teaching. I was teaching yoga and dance. I was teaching workshops. I was writing about psychological science and speaking to the public about science. And in May 2006, I was going to get this voicemail from my advisor. And I remember when I got the voicemail, he said, I just have something I want to talk to you about, Kelly. I had an intuition for whatever, I have no idea why, but I immediately knew there was a job. He was going to offer it to me and I should take it. And I felt in my body, sometimes when I have an opportunity and it's the right one, what the sensation I feel is like there's a hook on my heart, and like somebody is going fishing, and the fish hook has gotten hooked on my heart, and they're reeling me in, and I feel a physical sensation of being like propelled into the future. And it doesn't happen often, but I know that when I feel that sensation, I know now to trust it. And so what I would say to Kelly in 2005 is, and I know you're like worried about money right now and you're not sure what you're doing with your life. You're going to get a phone call and you're going to have an intuition. And you know what, Kelly, you can trust your intuition and keep trusting your intuition. And that was the job, by the way, was to come back to Stanford as a full-time faculty position to develop an introduction to psychology course and support people who were teaching that and train graduate students to be better teachers. And it was that position was the one that really led to my first psychology book, The Willpower Instinct, because I was spending so much time thinking about how to share psychological research. That book basically, it's like you're taking a class with me. I mean, I basically wrote a class that I was teaching at that time. And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do any of that if I hadn't gone back to a teaching role at Stanford. So good job, Kelly, for listening to your intuition.
Kelly, thank you very much for being here with us. It has been a very enriching experience, and I am sure that many people will be able to find greater well-being, hope, connection, and courage thanks to your book and thanks to the power of movement, just like I did. So thank you very much and see you soon, Kelly.
Thank you too.